We're less than halfway into the 2025 AFL season and there has already been a number of contentious suspensions handed down. It didn't take any time at all for the league to become embroiled in match review controversy as Jackson Archer copped a 3-match suspension for what many argued was a footy accident in round 1. Late in the match against the Western Bulldogs, Archer went charging in towards a ground ball contest and collided heavily with Bulldog Luke Cleary. The incident all took place very fast, but a replay shows Archer's knee collected Cleary in the head with great force and knocked him unconscious immediately. The end result of all this was a serious concussion injury for Cleary and a 3-match ban to Archer handed down by the match review officer. The AFL world was outraged by this decision and North Melbourne decided to challenge it at the Tribunal. North's defence in this case centred around Cleary's decision to go to ground rather than staying on his feet to collect the ball. Archer claimed that he was initially competing for the ball before looking to press. "I expected him to pick up the ball and stay on his feet," Archer said, noting also that players are trained not to go to ground. Archer also made the claim that he had attempted to slow down and brace for impact once he saw Cleary go to ground. The chairman of the AFL Tribunal, Jeff Gleeson, acknowledged that the rules of the game encourage players to keep their feet, but said that this doesn't always happen and players need to be aware. He also stated that Archer had shown too little too late. Ultimately, the Tribunal sided with the AFL's argument that Archer hadn't taken reasonable care to avoid the collision and his 3-match ban was upheld. The verdict once again sparked outrage from many fans and pundits who question how the AFL could punish players for seemingly entirely accidental collisions. Even opposition coach Luke Beveridge threw his support behind Archer, stating that he didn't think Archer had any intention of hurting Cleary and that he doesn't think he should be out of the game. It's fair to say that North Melbourne haven't gotten lucky with the AFL Tribunal this season, as in round 7 another one of their players in Paul Curtis was whacked with a controversial 3-match suspension. The incident that got him banned was a run-down tackle gone wrong on Port Adelaide's Josh Sin, which resulted in Sin getting a concussion. Much like with the Jackson Archer suspension, there was a great deal of debate about the state of the game and whether this action should warrant sanctioning, while North Melbourne were quick to appeal the MRO's decision to the Tribunal. At the Tribunal hearing, AFL counsel Sally Flynn said the Curtis tackle was unreasonable given that he had pinned the arms of Sin. She also maintained that the severe impact of the tackle also had to be weighed into the penalty. Curtis's counsel Justin Graham, on the other hand, argued that Curtis stopped and dropped his weight with his knees to the side of Sin during the tackle. He also argued that Sin's knees had plugged into the ground which caused him to fall forward. There was no slinging and there was no driving motion involved, Graham said. Graham also contested the grading of impact as severe, the highest of 4 levels, adding that there was no rough contact because the tackle was not unreasonable in the circumstances. Unfortunately for Curtis and North Melbourne, they were unsuccessful in overturning the verdict and his 3-game ban was upheld. Curtis did not need to propel Sin forward with such force, Tribunal panel member Jeff Gleeson said, adding, "Curtis could have, but did not make a significant attempt to roll to the side." Following the Tribunal verdict, there was more uproar from parts of the media and fans of the sport, and even a couple of North Melbourne players took public shots at the AFL to show their disdain for the result. Luke Parker put out a story on his Instagram account responding to the Tribunal's decision with the caption, "Please attend our touch football game this Thursday night versus Essendon, #NoMoreTackling." The man at the centre of it all, Paul Curtis, also took a shot, deciding to change his Instagram profile picture to the acronym ATFL, which stands for Australian Touch Football League. It's fair to say this decision has made an impact on the AFL community and has opened up a lot of discussion points around the path the game is heading down. The 2024 season produced many controversial tribunal hearings, enough that I could almost dedicate an entire video to it. If I were to choose just one though which captured the most attention and debate, it would have to be Isaac Heaney's round 17 suspension, as well as the subsequent tribunal and appeals board hearings. The incident which sparked this circus happened late in the third quarter of Sydney's clash with the Saints, when Heaney threw his arm back and collected Jimmy Webster in the nose, attempting to gain generation in the marking contest. Heaney's immediate reaction suggested that the contact made to his head was accidental. However, an adjustment to the MRO guidelines at the start of the year meant that he was in trouble regardless of his intention. Prior to the start of the 2024 season, the AFL announced that players ruled to have committed the strike would now be graded as intentional rather than careless, meaning that a strike to an opponent's head would result in a suspension even if classified as low impact. In previous seasons, it could have been easily argued at the tribunal that the contact made to Webster's head was accidental and therefore would be graded as careless, which would have seen Heaney get away with a fine. In other circumstances, a week-long suspension as a result of a minor incident wouldn't have received much media attention. However, the controversy of this centred largely around Heaney's eligibility for the Brownlow medal. Up until this point of the season, Heaney was seen as one of the favourites to take out the league Best and Fairest award. However, the suspension would rule him ineligible to win it. The Sydney Swans challenged the initial suspension at the tribunal before taking it to the AFL Appeals Board when the hearing at the tribunal was unsuccessful. Ultimately, the Swans failed to get his one-game ban overturned, which led to much debate about whether the eligibility criteria for the Brownlow medal should be adjusted for the modern game. How could I possibly make this video without including the infamous Brayden Maynard incident during the 2023 final series? It was a moment that rocked the whole AFL world. Only a few minutes into the game, the D's were surging out the front of the stoppage through Angus Brayshaw, who unloaded a kick deep inside attacking 50 when he was knocked unconscious by an oncoming Brayden Maynard. Maynard, running out from the back line, jumped in the air in an attempt to smother Brayshaw's kick. However, he failed to do so and ended up making heavy contact with Brayshaw's head. From the footage, you can see that Maynard turns side on and braces for contact with his shoulder once the ball passes over his head, and it was this decision that would result in much controversy and debate in the following week. The MRO officer found that Maynard's actions were reportable under rough conduct, grading the incident as careless conduct, severe impact, and high contact, which meant that Maynard would be sent straight to the tribunal. The Tuesday night hearing that followed the first week of finals action was a long and no doubt stressful one for Maynard. The Pies sought help from a biomechanist and neuroscience expert to try and clear Maynard of any charge. As part of Maynard's defence, the Magpies pointed out that Angus Brayshaw deviated to his right after he kicked the ball and after Maynard had left the ground, even presenting coloured lanes to show that Maynard had run in a straight line while Brayshaw had drifted significantly right. AFL counsel Andrew Woods, on the other hand, argued that Maynard could have changed his landing by either outstretching his arms or opening them up to embrace Brayshaw. Collingwood, however, countered this point with evidence from Professor Michael Cole, who explained that Maynard had no time to react. Less than 400 milliseconds from the kick, and even less time once the ball had passed his fingertips. Once airborne, Mr. Maynard had no opportunity to avoid the collision, Cole said. Based on the numbers and based on the research, it's difficult to conclusively say Mr. Maynard would have been able to make any conscious decision to reposition his body. It's more of an innate reflexive response. In the end, the tribunal sided with Collingwood, and Brayden Maynard was free to play in the rest of the final series, where he went on to play in the Magpies premiership team. This verdict not only had massive ramifications on the 2023 final series, but also on the entire AFL going forward. Ahead of the 2024 season, the AFL announced a host of rule changes, including what some termed as the Brayden Maynard rule. This rule meant that whenever a player chooses to leave the ground to attempt to smother and collects their opponent in the process, their act would be deemed careless at minimum unless the player has taken all reasonable steps to avoid that high contact and/or minimise the force of that high contact. The incident also had massive ramifications for Angus Brayshaw, who had a long history of concussion issues preceding the 2023 qualifying final. Right on the eve of the 2024 season, Angus Brayshaw announced to his teammates that he had been medically retired effective immediately. While the Maynard incident wasn't the sole reason for his retirement, it is hard to imagine that it didn't at least play a role in Brayshaw's decision. It was the moment that rocked the Western Derby and the entire AFL world. A bit under 10 minutes into the third quarter of a clash between crosstown rivals West Coast Eagles and Fremantle, broadcast cameras picked up an off-the-ball incident where Andrew Gaff inexplicably punched an at the time 18-year-old Andrew Brayshaw. The punch left Brayshaw with a bloodied mouth and a broken jaw, and also set a target on Gaff's back for the rest of the game. West Coast at this point in the game had a nearly unassailable lead, and with Fremantle being out of finals contention, they made it their goal to rough up Gaff as much as they could and make sure that he was aware of what he had done. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, Gaff's actions were given the highest possible grading by the MRO, and he was set straight to the tribunal to be handed what was likely to be a season-ending suspension. During a post-match press conference, Eagles coach Adam Simpson came to Gaff's defence, saying that he wasn't quite sure Gaff's punch was intentional in regards to where he punched him. Gaff gave evidence on tribunal night, saying, "I felt sick I hit Andrew in the face. Absolutely no intention to hit him where I hit him. I tried to do a similar hit as to what I did 10 seconds earlier with my right arm." Neither of these statements ended up helping Gaff avoid the longest suspension of the decade up until that point, as the tribunal handed him an 8-match ban. This sanction guaranteed that it was season over for Gaff no matter how far the Eagles made it in September, while also ruling him ineligible for the 2018 Brownlow medal, which he was tipped to be a contender for. As it turned out, the West Coast Eagles would go on to win the 2018 Premiership, and the man who replaced Gaff in the AFL side would go on to be the hero on Grand Final day. Gaff's punch and subsequent suspension was the topic of a lot of discussion amongst fans and media figures for the next few weeks, and it is still remembered as one of the most infamous incidents to take place on an AFL field. We're going to go back a bit further for this next one, all the way back to the opening round of the 1997 season. The round concluded with an incredibly spiteful match between powerhouse rivals Carlton and Essendon on an Easter Monday, where multiple players from both teams were charged or asked to explain their actions for various offences. By far, though, the biggest controversy caused by this game actually happened after the final siren. Once the game had completed, not every player was willing to shake hands immediately. Cameras captured a fiery verbal clash between Carlton's Greg Williams and Essendon's Sean Denham, with multiple of Williams' teammates as well as umpire Andrew Coates stepping in to try and settle him down. Controversy was sparked when Williams appeared to shove umpire Coates away whilst continuing to shout at Denham. Whilst he probably didn't know it yet, the AFL was set to come down hard on Williams for this action. Despite not being reported by Andrew Coates or any other match official on game day, the AFL charged Williams with unduly interfering with an umpire. Shortly after the conclusion of the match, Andrew Coates had written a letter to the General Manager of Football Operations as to why a report had not been made on match day, writing, "Williams became extremely upset and moved towards Denham to remonstrate. Whilst trying to persuade Williams not to pursue the matter, Williams told me to go away and simultaneously pushed me in the chest. I believe that this was a reflex action and one that was a result of pure frustration and anger directed at Denham. Whilst his actions could be construed as interfering with an umpire, at no time did I feel threatened, nor given the circumstances, that I was interfered with to an extent that would warrant such a serious charge, and accordingly, no report has been made." During the tribunal hearing, Andrew Coates gave evidence that he did not think he had been unduly interfered with Williams also claiming that he was solely fixed on Denham and had not known who he pushed away. A neuropsychologist was also called upon and gave the opinion that Coates was out of Williams' field of vision and that he would not have known that it was an umpire that he pushed. Ultimately, though, the tribunal sided with the AFL, finding that Williams had breached the rule after hearing the argument that intent was not necessary to prove the charge. As a result of this guilty verdict, Greg Williams was handed a 9-match ban. Carlton were unwilling to accept this result, however, as they chose to seek an injunction 2 days after this verdict. The injunction was granted pending a proper hearing of the case at a later date, allowing Williams to take the field in round 2. The hearing took place before Justice John Hedigan on May 13, 1997, and over the course of 3 days, the court heard evidence about the financial impacts of the suspension on Carlton and Williams. The club claimed it could lose out on more than $1.475 million if it missed the grand final, while also arguing that the suspension, should it stand, would severely damage Williams' reputation. Williams himself filed an affidavit outlining the potential effects of the ban, saying he'd struggled to regain a spot in the senior side due to lack of match fitness. They also argued that the tribunal finding him unduly interfering with an umpire where there was no evidence to support the finding would breach natural justice, as it would be unreasonable. On May 29, 1997, Justice Hedigan handed down his verdict, concluding that no reasonable tribunal could have found Williams guilty because there was no evidence he had intended to interfere with the umpire. If you thought that would bring the end to this whole ordeal, you'd be wrong, as the AFL made the decision to appeal this ruling to the Court of Appeal. In a split 2-1 decision, Greg Williams' 9-match suspension was restored by Justices Clive Tadgell, Ken Hayne, and David Ashley. Finally, roughly 3/4 of the way into the home and away season, Greg Williams was set to begin serving his time on the sidelines in round 17 of the 1997 season. Williams, however, retired after the 1997 season following the months-long ordeal and never ended up serving the full length of his suspension. Truly one of the most bizarre ends to an AFL player's career.